In a world of uninteresting podcasts, you're listening to Awaken Nation.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Zales, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people, just like you and me, from all over, who are doing amazing things. Welcome to Awakened Nation.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I have a great guest on today. I got turned on through a couple of friends to this guy's work, and it's pretty amazing. Jeremy Slate, you're going to love today's episode. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm stoked to be here hanging out.
Yeah, I mean, you're a powerhouse. You have the Create Your Own Life podcast, which I love. You're also the CEO of Command Your Brand, and you've earned top nods from Inc. and podcast magazines. And you were a power lifter and from Stillwater, New Jersey. Shout out to all my New Jersey friends. But what really, really impressed me was the caliber of guests you've had on your show, Jeremy. I mean, you've had General Michael Flynn, Dinesh D'Souza, Dr. Peter McCullough, Brandon Straka, who I love, Dave Rubin, Dr. Alveda King, Roger Stone, and many, many more. Your Command, Your Brand is also, on fire and on point with helping podcasters become a little bit more famous. But we're going to do a deep dive into this. Jeremy, officially welcome to Awakened Nation.
Hey, Brad, I'm stoked to be here and spend some time, man.
Good, good. First, this is the first time I've ever had this on the show, and that is you went to Oxford. Am I correct? Let's start
Yeah,
with that.
I did my undergrad degree in I was a double major in Catholic theology and Torah. I got to my senior year and they're like, you're one credit short of double majoring. So I did that, and then apparently I needed one more class in a prereq, and I could have triple majored, but I didn't want to stay in college any longer. So then from there, Seton Hall actually had a sister university program with New College Oxford. So I ended up doing a literature program in the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, Chesterton, Lewis, and a lot of stuff like that at Oxford. It was like a 3-month program, and then I came back and got my master's from Seton Hall in I don't know how to describe it other than it used to be called classics, but it's Roman and Greek civilization, and I studied emperor worship and stuff like that.
So you're a little bit of a geek or a nerd there, because I'm a big
Just a
fan
bit.
of Tolkien. Uh, Asimov and Herbert are my big obsessive compulsive
I
reads.
was obsessed with Alexander the Great, believe it or not, and that's what brought me
Nice.
to like a lot of my like later studies.
Yeah, he was very interesting because out of the 17 things that they attributed to Alexander the Great, I was looking up like the fight with the Amazonians, all the different things. I just am fascinated with all that stuff, and I think we're kindred souls on that level.
Yeah, it's interesting because the thing about him is he's like this philosopher king type character. Is
Hmm.
he studied a lot of different things. He probably slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow and things like that. But then he got to a certain point in his life, and it's kind of when this thing between philosophy and power kind of flipped, and he became this like total jerk. And that's when he kind of like was obsessed with who he was, and like
Yeah,
he was killing his top generals and stuff. But there was actually like this tipping point for him.
yeah. Do you know who I am? That's I can picture him saying that
Well,
if
it
we did a
wasn't even
modern.
that. Like it went to his head. Like there's this so the first thing the Macedonians do is they conquer Babylon, right? So then when they conquer Babylon, Babylon, like the ruler there was seen as like a god among men. And they had this process in Babylon, it was called proskynesis. And what that basically means is you lay your entire body on the ground in front of the ruler because we are not worthy. So he walks into Babylon, and he has people laying on the ground in front of him. He's like, that's pretty cool. So then he conquers Egypt, and the Egyptians during that time, their rulers were considered to be like gods, right? Like they were already
Yeah,
considered that. So
right.
he walks into the oracle at Zeus Ammon in the city of Ammon in Egypt, and they say, "Greetings, son of God." And he's like, "Well, son of God, yes, I am." And these two things are like really big turning points for him because he starts thinking he's God. and it gets pretty crazy at that point in time.
I love it. We're talking about this on the show. This is how we open things here. Well, let me connect the dots to what you're doing today. This is the hero's journey. This is the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell talked about. And so, how do you go from, Oxford, learning the classics, looking up battles, and Alexander the Great, to becoming one of the top podcast hosts probably in the world? How does that happen?
Win Jeopardy in the privacy of your own home. You know what I mean? Like that's what it takes to be a good podcast host. Like
Yeah.
have lots of useless knowledge that doesn't quite connect. That at least that's what I've found because then you can keep up a conversation with a lot of different people. Like I'm aware of a lot of things, but I'm not an expert in a lot of things. So if we don't go
Right.
too deep, I'm in good shape. But it allows you to keep conversations with a lot of different people. So that's one half of it. I think the other half is I was a high school teacher for a couple of years after getting my master's, and I was just totally disenchanted. The school had gotten rid of letter grades and they only had number grades, and they only had letter grades. So what
Yeah.
happened is and they were weighted too. So like a D was a 1, a C was a 2, a B was a so what happened is kids realized if they failed absolutely everything but passed one thing with a B, they could pass for the semester. So it was just pandemonium, man. Like I could not get anybody to do anything. And at that point in time, like I'm almost 40 now. But like so you and I look pretty young now. You can imagine what I looked like at 24 years old. Like I had my coworkers trying to give me detention for not being in uniform. And I'm like, I work with you. So it just I burnt out really, really quick. And then in 2013, my mom ended up having a really bad stroke. And it made me look at a lot of different things I'm doing. I'm like, I just don't want to be here, man. Like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't know what the solution is. It's out there.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. And it sent me through a number of different things until I found something that worked. I tried network marketing, but it made me feel kind of weird trying to get my friends into a thing. I tried insurance sales, which I was great at, but I hated those morbid conversations of death
Yeah.
every day. I sold products on Amazon. So I did a lot of different things. And I've been a podcast fan since way back in grad school. My college professor got me listening to a podcast by the podfather himself, Adam Curry, the man that invented podcasting, called The No Agenda Show. And I've been listening to that show since 2009, man. So like when I got to 2014, I'm like, you know what? I could start a podcast. My
Yeah.
first go at it was terrible. It lasted for about 60 days and it just wasn't very good. And I had no listenership. And it took me almost a full year in 2015 to come back and try it again. And we had 10,000 listens in our first month. And that really made me see I had something there. And from there, it's led me to a lot of what I'm doing today.
Well, you do. You have an extraordinary podcast. And I have 10 close friends that we guest swap, and we critique each other, we help each other. And you are now in that top 10, my friend,
Oh,
because
damn.
yeah, and I'm very picky. Like I work with Randall Kenneth Jones, and I've known him in person for probably about a good 5, 7 years. And he will call me up because he interviews some of the top celebrities that boomers grew up with.
Mhm.
And when he has a controversial guest on, he's not used to controversy. So I have to talk him through how to do that. And so we have a lot of fun. Tony Watley is someone who's also a friend that I also
Oh,
check
Tony's the
out.
man.
He
I've
is, he
I've been
really,
in a mastermind with him for a number of years. He's a good dude.
oh yeah. Apex. You in Apex?
No, it's something different we have other than that.
Oh, okay. Just curious. I'll cut that out. Um, but you and I have a lot in common because my father was a chiropractor and had a bachelor's degree in chemistry at a time when nobody had those things. He was well educated, and he taught me that you have to know a little bit about something. Otherwise, you can't carry on a conversation with, really smart people. And you and I both have had some smart people on our shows, but the one interview that really impressed me was with Brandon Straka. Do you want to talk about
Mm.
that? Because, I mean, your style of interview is really a conversation, and that I
What
hold.
I guess what did I do that you liked? I'm always curious to find out like what I've done because I'm just trying to talk to somebody and learn something.
Yeah, it was your questions weren't the usual, knock it out of the gate questions. You were sitting there asking him to go deeper into how this all started with the walk away
Mm,
movement. And
yeah.
then second, and am guilty of this sometimes. I'm guilty of the opposite. You ask the question and then shut up and
Yeah.
listen to that answer. And his answer was like 10 minutes long, and it was just animated and great. And you let the conversation flow and come out, and the truth come out about him being arrested on
Mm.
January because of being at the
Oh, I
Capitol
know
on
what you're
January
talking
6th.
about.
Yeah.
That was I had heard the night before they were talking about it on Timcast IRL, so I had like actually brought up. Like that's the thing too is like I'm immersed in the subjects I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I'm able to kind of like I can't explain it other like here's an easy way for everybody to get it is how easy would it be for you to interview your favorite athlete,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? Like you know everything about them, you've watched every game, you know what they're doing. So for me, like I'm so immersed in the subjects that I'm discussing with people that asking questions it's not just like okay, I read this thing and I've heard about it. Like I'm very familiar with the subjects I'm talking with people about. So I
Mhm.
think that's what makes the conversations flow a lot better is I'm typically, you know, obviously I want to learn something. I don't know everything, and that's the
Yeah.
reason I bring people in, but I'm talking about subjects that I'm very immersed in. So I think that does help.
I agree with that because I interviewed Bruce Buffer, and the guy who asked me to substitute
Ooh.
host for him. I train in jujitsu and kempo, and so I was able to kind of be neck and neck with him about the subject of that. And like you, I get immersed. Like I'm not intimidated by my guests. I'm filled with more curiosity. Do you do that as well?
I try my best because like my goal is to like, and I because I find the hardest thing to do with as a host, but the most useful thing is if you can learn to take the viewpoint of the person listening to your show, that's where you're really going to find the success. Because I find oftentimes, like, sure, there's episodes where it went off the rails because I got kind of excited. Like I interviewed CJ Wilson, who used to pit, he won a Cy Young pitching, and he pitched for the Texas Rangers and also the LA Angels. Like, dude, I'm a nerd about baseball, so we're talking
Oh,
about
really?
spin rate, and we're talking about like curveballs and sliders, and like all these different things about learning pitching, and so because I my dad played pro ball, so like I'm like way into to baseball. So like for me, I had fun doing that episode, but it didn't do very well because it wasn't presented in a way that it was made for the listener. And I think that's what you really have to understand is when you're doing this, the only reason you get to do it is because there's people listening to you. And you can't forget about that. So for me, I'm always trying to learn like if somebody's listening to this, what are they hoping to get out of that? Not what am I hoping to get out of it? That's the hardest thing to do, but it's the most useful thing to do.
I think that is. I think that's the mistake most podcasters do is they forget to ask questions as if they are the audience. And I constantly try to listen as if I want my audience to get deeper nuggets, deeper truths. So we agree on that one. By the way, I read a little bit of your book. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Jeremy Slater, and I want to talk a little bit about your book, Unremarkable to Extraordinary. Ignite your passion to go from passive observer to creator of your own life. And what I liked about that is you had interviews in there of people that have really turned their life around. Let's
Mm.
talk about that. What are some of your favorites from that book?
Well, one of my favorite and probably the one that got me in the most trouble was when I interviewed the My Pillow guy himself, Mike Lindell,
Okay.
because he's telling this story about like where his life was so bad at a certain point, he was actually on the carpet with a comb trying to scrape crack rocks out of the carpet because he had ran out of drugs. And it's like to think that someone's life has hit that level of low and what they've come out of and they've done something. And I think the thing that's pretty incredible about Mike is that he found spirituality because I think that's it's so important and we all come at it in different ways, but I think we're inherently spiritual beings and I think to not acknowledge that really does create a lot of the situations we deal with in life. So I think that's one part of it, but the other part is he's done so much to help other people from the Lindell Recovery Network where he's helping other people that have been addicts. And even in the last election and everything else, he upset a lot of people, but he's continually put his money where his mouth is. Like he's
Yeah.
believed in his causes and he's really put himself behind it. So to me, he's was one of the most interesting people I got a chance to have on the show, and also mentioned in the book. Another one that was an incredible conversation was and this comes back to me being a big baseball fan, is my favorite New York Yankee, and that was Nick Swisher. Because I think the really cool thing about him is he was a guy like typically if you're a really great baseball player, you're drafted out of high school, right? You don't go to
Yeah.
college.
Right.
And for him, that he didn't have any interest. No teams wanted him. So he walked on at Ohio State and actually earned himself a scholarship. And by the time he graduated, they actually named the baseball field after him. So it's actually called Nick Swisher. The practice field is called Nick Swisher Field in Ohio State. And to
Wow.
just learn about like how somebody can take those things, because he looked at that and he goes, okay, well, obviously I'm not good enough. How do I get better? And his dad, Steve Swisher, was a pro in the 70s. And if you look at Nick's career statistics next to Steve's, they're a lot better because he took a lot of what he learned from his dad. He took a lot of that negative energy, a lot of those failures, and he figured out how to channel it. And I think to me, that's pretty incredible.
That is amazing. I always admire people that are told you're not good enough or you suck or, like Michael Jordan's a good example in basketball, didn't make the team and then now becomes the top player in the NBA. This to me is extraordinary that people do that and they just say, I'm not giving up. You know?
Well, and you like Tom Brady's another one. I meant I never got a chance to interview Tom. I hope I still do at some point, but I wrote a chapter on him in the book because I find him to be one of the most inspiring athletic stories. If you look
Yeah.
at it, like his senior year of high school, he barely starts his senior year of high school. He then ends up going to Michigan because actually has a great senior year when he gets to start, and he fights to be a starter for 3 years. The coach that brought him there ends up leaving, so he's Lloyd Carr is the head coach of Michigan at that point in time, and Tom's fighting with Drew Henson to be the starter, and then he ends up getting the starting role halfway through the year. Gets drafted in the 6th round, so he almost doesn't get drafted only plays because Drew Bledsoe literally almost dies in the field when Mo Lewis hits him. And he becomes the greatest quarterback of all time because he took each one of those things and he's like, I need to be better. I need to be better. I need to be better. I've only ever heard of 2 NFL quarterbacks that actually have film rooms built in their house. One is Tom Brady, the other is Peyton Manning. They actually sit and watch so much film, it's kind of disgusting because they realize that if you can see a play developing before it happens and develop that sixth sense, you're almost predicting the future. And that's how you get, maybe you don't have the biggest arm, you don't have the fastest legs, but that's how you win.
Well, even my nephew, Sebastian, who hates the New England Patriots, had to admit that Tom Brady was the greatest quarterback of all time.
Well, I'm
So,
a Packers fan, and we had Aaron Rodgers for years, and
oh, yeah,
he's an athletic specimen, but like like somebody like him, he's always had it.
yeah. What I admire about Tom Brady is he's still playing into his 40s, and then he eventually, retired. But that's incredibly powerful to see somebody defy the odds and also through diet and different things like that. So there's an additional podcast you could do with him about that alone. So you and I align politically. We talked about this in the green room earlier, but what I wanted to talk to you about is what wound you up into being conservative, more libertarian, and your guests reflect that. And what I love is you make no excuses, no apologies for being on the right, and neither do I. I want to talk about that because you bring out some great interviews with your guests.
I don't know that it was ever a turning point for me though, because like I was a Rush baby growing up. Dun 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 dun. Dun. I listened to Rush Limbaugh as a kid every day, so it's like, but here's the thing that I found, Brad. I find that I grew up much more conservative, and as I've gotten older, I've become much more libertarian. That's the thing I found, because I do find that it's tough to say I'm blue team or I'm red team. I feel like it really is because if you look at it like as people like I don't agree with 100% of what Republicans say, and I don't agree with 100% of what Democrats say. I don't even agree with what a lot of libertarians say. Like I don't agree with their opinions on drugs. So it's like I look at it and for me, I feel politically homeless, though I do lean conservative in a lot of ways. So for me, it wasn't really like a wake up moment. I've always been that way. And I was very Rush Limbaugh conservative until I discovered Alex Jones in high school, and then I became, a little bit more Alex Jones, I guess you could say. But I'll say for me the thing, and that so I've always talked about those things publicly my entire life or privately. I've always talked about things my entire life, and sometimes my wife has told me to shut up about them because I'm always talking about them.
For real.
But yeah, we got to a certain point during the pandemic though, and she eventually was like, "All right, You're either going to shut up or you're going to do something. And that was kind of the point we got to. And I'm like, all right, well, let's start with the My Pillow guy. So Mike Lindell ended up being one of the first, big episodes for me. So I interviewed him and Patrick Byrne within a few weeks of each other, the former Overstock.com founder. And I went into election fraud. And I upset a lot of people, Brad. But at the same time, I felt like I observed a world to be changing in a way that I didn't think was good for not just my country, but for humanity. And I felt like I needed to stand up and do something. And the thing I could do is use this megaphone I built to have conversations. Because if you look at it, things that are politically polarizing, Brad, they're not won by people calling each other names on Twitter. They're not. They're won by long conversations where a good
Yeah.
point is forced to make a better point. So to me, I think that's the real value in it, is really getting to hear firsthand from these people. And you know what I've gotten from some of the listeners? Like, a lot of listeners left me when I did that, but a lot of listeners stuck around too. And the
Yeah.
commentary I got from people is, wow, I didn't realize that that person was such a normal person. They had made him sound like they were the Antichrist to me. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest things, is these political people have become caricatures of people that just yell at each other on social media. And I think what we need to do is have conversations and come together.
You're listening to Jeremy Slate here on InfoWars. You can't handle the truth.
There's I got to send it to you, Brad. There's a really funny video of somebody took a whole bunch of Alex Jones clips and turned it into a country song. It's very funny. I got to send it to you.
Please.
Yeah, tune in next week.
Yeah. I did a lot of voiceovers through the years. Christopher Walken is the one I do best. But anyways, it is. I've noticed this as well with those guys are this or those guys are that, and we're dividing each other. And what has astounded me is how I still have friends who 100% believe the news media.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one friend, he's a professional comedian, and he just started in about Trump's this, Trump's that. And I was like, well, um, prove it, because that's not the narrative that I see. And slowly I've gotten him to stand back and go, oh, I didn't know that. I even sent him your Brandon Straka interview, and he was like, that is really interesting. So you're right. It's a long conversation. It requires us to be patient. And yes, I don't agree with everything the Republican Party does, or even the libertarians. But I do realize we are in a major turning point in the United States. What do you think is the big lie that people hold on to right now and maybe need to let go of?
How long we got? I don't know. There.
Well, you can have more than one.
But there's a few of them, right? Because it's like I think that the problem goes back to media dishonesty, and there's a couple different, like, man, there's a lot of problems with money. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things we could handle with this. Like, if you look at how advertising controls the information you're consuming, that's a
Yeah.
big deal. Like, the amount of pharma money that pours into stuff is wild. I think that's one part of it. Lobbying money is another big problem too. So it's like, the problem is money controls truth. And because of that, if it's not profitable, that truth doesn't matter. And so I think if number one, we need to get rid of direct to consumer advertising for pharma. And I think that's actually going to change a lot of that. The other thing is, as well, is these hosts, especially on MSNBC, NBC, like even Fox, like, they're not held accountable for the things they say. They
Right.
make claims, people believe them, and then nobody does anything. And then when cases come up, judges just kind of file them with a yawn and don't do anything with them. So it's like, it becomes a big problem of the system is broken. And I think that's why the alternative system has become so important. And that's people being able to talk on places like Rumble. I know we're still on YouTube, and it's still where our biggest audience is, but I have to be really careful what I say over there. And I can only publish so many of my episodes over there. Like, they're definitely all on Rumble. X, which used to be known as Twitter, has become a pretty good place to still talk, but I can't post anything on Facebook anymore. I have to be so careful about what I post on LinkedIn. Like, we have to be able to have these conversations, Brad, and the places to have them are disappearing. And I think that's the real problem. So if it's not easily accessible for people to consume it, then they're not going to consume it, right? They're not going to go through a lot of different actions to get it. So the thing is fighting in these spaces to open up more spaces and also create accountability. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I know that's, as I said, that's a big question. We could spend hours on that one, but there's so many things that are broken.
Yep. I agree with you on that. I had several videos banned on YouTube, and I got flagged a couple of times. And there were like the three or four things that we shall not mention on the show that got them banned. And I was, although I talk about conspiracy theories, usually the guests on my show have a first person experience with what they're talking about. And so I had Mindy Robinson on the show, and she was directly involved in the audits in Vegas here,
Mhm.
and they found problems. And within minutes, when they were about to announce it, the entire people that were in charge of that particular event in 2020, they resigned, and then the website mysteriously went down.
Mhm.
And she said, we found problems, major
Mhm.
problems. And so there's a concerted, controlled effort, it seems, to keep truth away from the common person. And I truly believe there's a hidden agenda that they're trying to exercise over the next 5 years, 7 years.
But I don't
And
think it's as devious as people think it is, because they're kind of like, oh,
yeah,
it's the Illuminati, or it's this or it's that. And like I have friends that I think they think there's like a boogeyman under every bed, and that's not
yeah,
the case. I think it just comes down to the simplicity of power and money. That's literally what it comes down to. Is there are people that are corruptible and get into positions where they want to control, and once they join the corrupt kids club, the other corrupt kids are like, hey, welcome to the game. This is how we do it. And so I think it's not
yeah.
as devious as people want to think it is. But you even look at I don't know when you were going to publish this, but like it came out yesterday that they tried to basically bribe Carrie Lake to drop out of the election, and she's like, no, I'm not going to take money to do that. So you look at that and you're like, well, why would the RNC want to pay somebody to drop out of the race? Like that's a little
Right.
crazy. And it makes you kind of look at like how messed up are things, right? Like how messed up are things? I know there's people that want to believe there's like a vast network of blah 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 blah, but I think it's just the corrupt kids club, and they get to a certain point, and they're like kind of like, I got stuff on you, you got stuff on me, you like money, I like money, let's get money together, you know?
Yeah, I think that is, I am one of those who believes there's a tiny cabal, going, trying to create the Great Reset. But
Well, the
yeah,
other side of that is I think there's 13 families trying to control the world, but anyway.
wait a minute. So you do? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole, and I would consider myself an expert in it, but I won't talk about it because it brings your vibration down. You know what I mean? It's not productive. It brings your
Yes.
vibes down, and you wind up being slow. So, what I am curious about is how you're able to hustle. It's amazing to watch how much content you put out and the brands you manage and do your show and all these other things. How do you do that? That's all I want to know.
Employees. There's no way I could do it all
You
myself, man.
you ruined
Um,
it, man. We
yeah,
had this illusion.
at Command Your Brand, we have a team of 15, and that's literally the only way I could do it. We actually brought everything related to my podcast into the company's production house, so the company produces everything. I will tell you, Brad, the thing that I still do is all my own booking, because I'm very particular about who I want to talk to and why I want to talk to them. So I may ask for help from somebody in our PR team if they have the right contact to help me book somebody, but at the same time, like I'm very particular on who I want to talk to and why, and I don't want to bring people into my world or to my audience that are just not quite aligned with my way of thinking.
Yeah.
So for me, I still handle all my booking, which it does create issues of maybe I didn't work on booking in a while and I got to handle some stuff, and like we got to make sure we have episodes for this week. So like that, it does create kind of that kind of an issue. But from the production side, like I haven't edited a podcast in years, man. Like they do all the editing and production and graphic design and all that stuff for me. I just it's I couldn't do it without the right people on my team.
Yeah. I agree with you. And you have great people on your team. I got introduced to Becca or Rebecca Schomel. She and I she reached out to me. I forget what it was for, but she wanted to book a couple of people on my podcast probably 6, 7 months ago. And we actually formed a really good relationship where I could call her because we had a guest that canceled at the last minute, and I called her up, and we connected, and then she introduced me to you, and I feel very blessed by that because you weren't on my radar in the beginning, and now I'm looking at the work you're doing. I'm like, man, more people need to know about this Jeremy dude. who,
I
who, dre-
appreciate that, man.
who
Well, and one of
dresses.
the number one things I'm proud of, which I know Rebecca does and Megan on our team does, is like the thing I'm really proud of is I push my people that if there's any humanly possible way, get on the phone.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know a lot of agencies won't do because I'm a podcaster, man. Like I know, what I want. I know, what I want to happen on my own show. So I try to create something similar for the shows that we're working with. So, like you mentioned that she hopped on the phone with you. Like that's something that we really push. We want our team in actual, like, not just, hey, I sent you an email and I'm going to keep sending you an email until you ignore me. I want people to actually get in communication, man, because that's what this is about.
Well, I'm a baby boomer, so I appreciate it.
I'm
And
a
like,
my wife knows this about me. I'm a phone person. Like that's why she's like, if somebody sends me a text that's too long, I'll usually be sitting there like, dear God, I'm not reading this, and I'll call them. Like if I get an email that's too long or a text that's too long, I just don't answer it. I
yeah,
usually either call the person or ignore it.
I'm the same way, man. You're a baby boomer with a Gen X glazing, I believe, or millennial glazing. You and I suffer from the same problem, baby face. I looked like I was 19 when I took my company public back in the 90s, and I was in my 30s at that point. And today I'm in my 60s, and people are looking at, it's the baby face. And I'm assuming that's why you grew the mustache because
It actually is. My wife absolutely hates it, but I guess the issue is like for me, like I'm talking to high profile people and congressmen and senators and and influencers, and like you have to at least look like you're close to their age. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
because they do treat you a little bit differently.
they do. And I noticed that shift years ago. But I have a client who's also a friend, and he's in his 80s, a Vietnam vet. And so one person came forward and wanted to interview him for a series, and I said, I think he's better for the series because he looks older. He looks like he could be your compatriot. I look like a kid trying to interview this older fighter pilot, from Vietnam, and it's just, it's a blessing and a curse.
Hmm.
You look young and everything. And by the way, you're when I saw your production shots, uh, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna put this up in the video version of this. But when Jeremy sent me his headshots, he looks like the most interesting man in the world. He has like on a
I've
smoking
interviewed
jacket.
him, by the way. I've
Oh
had him on
yeah.
my podcast.
Oh, that is awesome. I have to watch that show. But when I saw this, I said, does this young man have a British accent? Because he looks very.
So here, I will tell you though. I will tell you. Until I open my mouth, people that aren't American think I'm Welsh. And then they hear me speak and you're like, oh, you're American. They usually think I'm British.
I knew you didn't say mustache, so I know
Yeah.
you're American. One of my neighbors, he has a big handlebar mustache, with the curl on the end, and he's maybe late 20s, early 30s, and I always tease him when I see him on the street. I'm like, "Good day, sir."
I just was on Garreth Icke. He's David Icke's son. I was just on his show recently, and he introduced me as a man with a sensational mustache. So there you go.
David Icke actually was one of those who woke me up, along with William Cooper, the late
Oh,
great William
a
Cooper.
pale horse.
Yes, Behold a Pale Horse. And the book that woke me up the most, or series of books, was by a geopolitical analyst named Richard Mayberry. Richard does not go into any conspiracy theories. He is strictly a geopolitical economic analyst, and he deals only in three areas. The number one thing he always talks about is there have been 41,000 wars since 3600 BC,
Wow.
and they all took place, most of them, at least 94 to 98%, all took place in one area. He calls this area Kyrgyzstan, and that's from Russia all the way down to northern Africa, and from Japan all the way over to like Europe, the edge of
Mhm.
Europe. And he says most of the wars took place in these areas, and he calls it Kyrgyzstan. The second thing that he stands on is he goes back to ancient Rome. One of his best books is called Ancient Rome: How It Affects You Today. And by the way, his books are read, they're kind of on the curriculum for homeschooling.
Mm.
And he doesn't hold back the truth. He basically says governments will always manipulate data and they will always manipulate the coin,
Mm.
the monetary system. And then the third thing, he says the battle has always been throughout history between liberty and political power.
Mhm.
And I think, let's talk about that a little bit because, we can go into the conspiracy theory arena all day long, but some of those tangible things that are coming to the surface, and a lot of those conspiracy theories are actually becoming conspiracy facts today. We're standing in 10 predictions that people thought were just crazy 20 years ago. Um, let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that too, because I know for me, the thing that actually woke me up is reading G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, about
Yes.
the Fed.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at a lot of these situations, how much of it is connected to banking, it is a little bit wild, right? Like if you look at like, during the First World War, the Second World War, you had the same banks funding both sides of the war. Why? Because they make money off both sides. If you look at a
Yeah.
lot of the control mechanisms. So I think what really happened, and I can't really put my finger on when, but at some point in the Middle Ages, they realized that it wasn't going to be as easy to control people with armies anymore. It would become easier to control them economically. And I think
Yeah.
that's when things really changed. So I can't really put my finger on when that is, but that's really been the thing that I've followed over the years is economics being used in a really dangerous way. I don't know if you've read The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I,
You've had
I,
him on your show, haven't you?
I did have him on the show. I had him on the show a few years ago. And we weren't video at the time, so I brought it back recently. But like, money has always been used as a weapon, right? Like it's always been used as a weapon. And I think until we can figure out how to handle the financial system, we're going to keep perpetuating the same problems. And here's the thing that really worries me about that, Brad, is to me, what I don't want them to do is like, we've had all these financial problems, we've had all these problems. We can fix your problems with a central bank digital currency because that's actually, it's not a solution, it's even more control, right? Like if you look at the very first Roman emperor, Rome was at first a republic and then eventually became an empire around around the year 43, I think, and then Augustus died in 17 AD. But Augustus is the first Roman emperor. He's the adopted son of Julius Caesar, not his actual son. And in that last 100 years of Rome, like, dude, it was like crazy tumultuous. There was like a general every 5 years raising an army and attacking Rome. There was, Gaius Marius, there was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, there was Julius Caesar. Like this just kept happening again and again and again. So the Roman people, like, they're petrified. They all got PTSD, and they're like, we just want something to be stable. So we have this last kind of last battle in the Civil War, which is the Battle of Actium, and which is a city on eastern Greece. It's between Mark Antony and the young Augustus. He's barely above being a 19-year-old at this point in time, and Augustus creates peace. And there was this office in Rome called the dictator. And a dictator would take an office for 6 months. They'd have absolute power. They'd fix everything, and then they lay their power down. Now, Augustus knew that if you create peace, people are going to demand that you never relinquish power. So he made things so peaceful and so profitable, and eventually said, "Okay, guys, I'm going to lay down my power now." And they're like, "No, no, no, don't go, don't go, don't go, don't go. We want you here." And that's what happens, because if you create the right situation, people will demand what's terrible for them. And that's what's a really, really scary thing. And that's why I think if we don't handle economics the right way, getting back to a gold-backed currency, handling these markets, ending central banks, we're going to be in trouble, man.
I
I know that was a
agree.
long-winded explanation, so I
No,
apologize.
no, that was totally. I'm a huge fan of G. Edward Griffin, and he laid it out. Some people call it a conspiracy theory, his book, but it was the rawest, most truthful uh, expose of how the Federal Reserve got started that I have ever read. It just slaps you right in the face. If you're not ready for it, It's a long read, but it lays the groundwork for the control. And I agree with you. A lot of people right now are asking, why aren't we taught certain things in school, like success principles? Why aren't we taught how to handle money and where money actually comes from? You need collateral on money because money cannot exist unless you borrow it into existence because it's
Correct.
replacing the barter system. And so when people start to delve into this, they get confused very easily because we haven't been taught anything about it. So I learned about money through G. Edward Griffin and Richard Maybury. And basically, when they remove gold as the gold standard, guess what the collateral is, ladies and gentlemen, for those monetary, pieces of paper? We are, the
Hmm.
human race, is the collateral on these loans. So I think people are waking up today. Would you agree about that? More and more people actually are waking up.
Yes and no, because funny enough, this is what I was talking to Garreth Icke about this morning. Because if you look at it, I think we're starting to see some of these populist uprisings in a lot of places. You look at Viktor Orban in Hungary. You look at Meloni in Italy, who she's been okay. She hasn't been great. You look at
Right.
um who's the guy in Argentina that runs around
Oh
with the
yeah.
chainsaw? The guy with the chainsaw in Argentina, Milei.
Right.
You look at Trump here. Like we're starting to see kind of these populist uprisings where people are demanding something different. So I think that's a really positive thing. But at the same time, the pandemic never really ended. It just kind of faded out because the
Yeah.
pandemic faded out and we got Ukraine. And then, like, okay, so now we had a conflict in Kosovo and then we have a war in Israel. And now we're going to maybe have something happening in Taiwan. So it's like, I think the issue is the target keeps getting moved and people keep taking their eyes off the prize. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
we're like, oh, now we got to do that. We got to handle this. We got to handle that. When really it's about those things are distractions and they're meant to distract you. That's why they came right after the pandemic. It's
Yeah.
about keeping your eyes on the prize and actually like continuing kind of this populist uprising in a lot of places.
Well, Karl Marx believed that for Marxism or communism to thrive, capitalism must be destroyed. And I truly believe that
He
part.
also believed in using his co-author Frederick Engels to pay all his bills. But anyway,
Yeah, and he treated his kids like, you know what? I just find it interesting that people couldn't see the ruse during the from 2020 to 2023
mhm.
that we were being fooled.
Yes.
Uh, I can't fathom how people couldn't see it. And I think it boils down to this, and maybe you can comment on this. I think a lot of people have in their head a tape that's running that says they would never do that to us, ever, ever, ever. And the truth is, if you peel back the layers, the pandemic cannot stand on any kind of platform except stand. It doesn't
Hmm.
make any sense why everything was shut down, why people lost their businesses, why we had to fight against the people that we voted into power. And in those more leftist blue states, it was almost impossible to open a business or have a business. People went bankrupt, they lost everything. And these governors stood up there like they were so virtuous, taking this power and control all of a sudden and mocking the red states that said, go about your business. You don't need to mask up. And we saw it here in Vegas. They shut down all the casinos, and you were required to wear a mask to go inside. And people were getting kind of frustrated and angry. So let's talk about that a little bit. I feel that it was the first time since I've been a kid where the governments, state, local, and federal, overstepped their boundary.
Well, I think the problem with that is, and I think this is why a lot of people get fooled, is 80% of the people in the world, they're social. They're really good people. They like others, they'll help others. If they see a nun on the side of the road, they'll help them change their tire.
Right.
80% of the people are that way. 20%, they're not so good, right? And out of that 20%, two and a half, they're real mother effers. And a lot of them tend to be politicians. And I think that's the problem that we have is the people that inherently aren't good people, they like power and they like control, so they flow towards politics.
Yeah.
The rest of us, like, and this is how I judge a person is, what are the products they produce like? And what I mean by product is like, what does their business create? Like, what does their business create that it can be exchanged for money, right? Like, what is the quality of the things they do and create? So, like, here's an example. Chuck Schumer. He's a
Right.
senator in the state of New York. Chuck Schumer, what kind of products has he had?
Nothing.
He went from
Nothing.
law school right to government. So he's never had a product, right? You look at
Right.
people like that. Pelosi. Well, her family gambled a bunch of money in the markets and made money. Well, that's not really a product. It doesn't really help people.
Right.
Donald Trump, like he's built companies, he's built buildings, he's built organizations. So like to me, that's a really good judge of a person. If they have products that they can exchange with others that are valuable, that's really going to show you how good somebody is. And when
Right.
you look at a lot of politicians, if they've always been in a like these guys that, in every state's got them, the perpetual candidate. They're always running for something. And when the next one comes up, they're going to run for it. Eventually they'll get something.
Right.
Those people haven't really exchanged something with others. So to me, if you can look at the value, it could be services, it could be like, cars, it could be something. But if somebody's not exchanging services or products with another, those are the people you got to look out for.
I have to agree with you. And we see it all the time with politicians. They're completely out of touch with the common person. I think it was CNBC last week laid out the budget for millennials and Gen X on how they could break down $100,000 a year budget. And you're like, most young people getting out of college right now are making 35 grand a year. That's an average salary between 35,000 and 53,000. So how how out of touch can you be when you
Mhm.
think everybody's making $100,000 a year? And
Well, and even that is the value of that dollar is, like what is it versus like even a 2010 dollar? Like it's
yeah,
it's dramatic.
well, this is where I think people need to learn about money. So when I was about 17 or 18 in 1979, 1980, my parents bought a two-bedroom house, split level with big, garage downstairs and upstairs. And it was a cabin, basically, a log cabin on about half an acre of land. And that house went for $56,000.
Hmm.
Today, that house goes for about $650,000. And,
Wow.
and people sit there and go, well, it increased in value. No, it takes the same to buy the same or have the same buying power of
The dollars are worth
1979.
less.
Yes, they have to print and print money. And now you need that many little rectangles to buy that because they've destroyed the dollar. So it now takes $650,000 to buy what we used to be able to buy for 56 grand.
My parents bought their house in 1980 for $30,000. It's a 900 square foot house. I grew up in a really small house, and my parents retired 2 years ago, and they ran away to the great state of Florida, and they sold that house for $240,000. They did nothing to it other than maintain it. So to think that the value didn't change that much, it's just that your dollar is worth nothing. That's the problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, but if you go to Elizabeth Warren, not my favorite politician, but she did give a great speech on the upcoming death of the middle class. And she
Mhm.
lays out all these statistics from 1971. And we'll put that in the show notes and how things have changed and why things have changed. And the one thing she never quite uh, hones in on as the cause of this, and that is government.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying I'm not anti-government. I'm just not a fan of government being involved in every aspect of our life. Being a Republican or a conservative means you uh, are supposed to preserve the republic. And that means smaller government, stay out of people's personal lives. And it seems like right now, Jeremy, people don't even know that laws are being broken. People don't even realize the Constitution is being ignored. People
Mhm.
watch the news and they announce what this politician did or that politician did, and they don't even know that these people are committing crimes right in front of us because they've been indoctrinated into whatever. Uh, let's talk about that a little bit because that's the scariest part to me.
Well, I think the system is broken in a lot of ways too, because there's always this argument of, did America get its democracy from the Greeks, or did it become a republican from the Romans? And you know, actually, we're a combination of a few different things. We're a democratic republic because we have some things that are direct democracy. We have some things that are more representative, which is the Roman way. And then we also have somebody that's kind of like a monarch, but kind of not. And that's the office of the president, the executive office. So I think people don't understand our form of government. And I think that's a major problem because I'll tell you right now, it's not that long ago since I was a high school teacher, Brad, and they don't teach civics anymore. And that's a
Yeah.
huge problem. Like, we're not educated on how to be a citizen. I think that's a really big problem. The bigger problem is, too, is the system's been broken for 111 years at this point in time. The year 1913 was a very pivotal year in our country's history, and nobody talks about it from that perspective. They talk about the Titanic in 1912, but that's about it. In 1913, we had in December of that year is when the Federal Reserve Act passes, and then it becomes law in 1914. In 1913, you also have the Income Tax Amendment passes. You also have the 17th Amendment passes, and that's where they get rid of state legislatures electing senators. Now they're directly elected by people. So you know what happens? What's happened is the Republican system is broken. Like, the system of a republic is broken because now state legislatures don't have senators, so they don't have anybody representing them. And we saw that the most during the 2020 election because there was nobody speaking for legislatures, the state legislatures. And you have the Congress, which represents the people, and it always should have. And that's the direct democracy side of things. So unless people understand how government works, and unless we actually restore things to the way they're supposed to be, they're not going to get fixed. I think if you look at, there was one amendment to the Constitution that George Washington recommended, and that was that he wanted one congressional representative for every 30,000 people. If you did the math on that, we'd have an obnoxious number of people in Washington right now.
Yeah.
But the good thing about that, Brad, could you imagine that number of people trying to agree on something? We would be so free, man, because they never agree on anything. And I think that's the problem. That you have people that are, the groups they're representing are too large, so they could never represent them all. And it's easier for them to agree and take your freedom.
Identity politics has played a huge role. It is kind of scary, and I worry about the future simply because
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, you are. We need to hang more so I don't get depressed. It started right after the Civil War, 1867, I believe was the date, when they turned the United States for America into the United States of America, and we became a corporation. It's a Delaware corporation. You can look this up online. It's there in Delaware. And from that moment on, we slowly eroded into what we have today, which is corporatism, really. I always say this, we need a lobbyist for the American people because it is. We have a broken system. So,
well, I will tell you though, Brad, like the thing I'm hopeful about, because I know we've talked about a little bit of gloom and doom here. Like, the thing that's hopeful is national politics doesn't matter that much. I think the thing we saw during the pandemic is local politics matters a lot.
Yeah.
So if you vote in your local elections, be it your mayor, your school board, your different positions like this, if you're not happy with what's happening in your schools, you do what we do and homeschool your kids. Like, dude, there's so much that can be done if we do those things. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to add that.
No, I'm glad you added that. And it gives us a positive light. We get to see that local and state is far more, our leveraging point if we want to make change. I agree with that. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for being on Awakened Nation. I'm not going to let you go yet. We have a lightning round, but reach out to Jeremy. You can go to jeremyslate.com, and you also have Jeremy, ryanslate.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we also had a new book that just came out recently, if I can mention that as well.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Because, a lot of what we've talked about today is the power of having big conversations and why they're so important. And I think, as Adam Curry, the podfather himself said, podcasting is the last bastion of free speech. And I think unless we have these conversations, we're not going to be able to do much. So I put together a really awesome book called Command Your Brand, Grow Your Impact, Income, and Influence in a New Media Landscape. And it's going to help people understand how to take best advantage of podcasts. So if they head over to bestpodcastbook.com, they can grab that.
Oh, thank you. I'm really jazzed. I'm going to get that. Because I always I don't know about you folks. If you're listening and you're a fellow podcaster, this is the guy to connect with. Jeremy Slate. He not only knows what he's doing, he's a great interviewer. Some of his interviews and the people he's been able to attract will make your jaw drop. Just powerful, everyday conversations with the movers and shakers, both politically and in the corporate world as well, and some celebrities too. But Jeremy, thank you for a great interview. Uh,
Absolutely.
we're going to go into a lightning round. I ask you three questions so people get to know you better. My first question is there something about you that we don't know about you that you're passionate about or you love doing?
Well, it depends. Like, I used to be really loud about, so I used to be a competitive powerlifter, so I used to be really loud about my fitness stuff. And at 36, almost 37, I'm in the best shape of my life. I run a mile every morning, and I still, bench press over 300 pounds, and deadlift over
What?
500 pounds. And I'm 5'5" though, man. So it's like you don't need a whole lot of distance to go for that. So for me, fitness is a huge part of my life.
I'm 5'8" and I'm sitting here still going 300 pounds. What? My
Well,
strong point or my
so I used to be when I in like 2014, I was still a competitive power lifter. I'm like 5'6" ish, so like somewhere around there, like maybe 5'7" on a good day if you stretch me out. And I was 215 at 8% body fat, so 215 pounds, 8% body fat. I pulled a 40,000 pound army tank on the back of an 18 wheeler. So like I did some fun stuff when I was stronger. I'm like 160 now though, so.
well, now you're getting a dad bod, right? You're being
Yeah, my wife goes, "You got a really good dad bod. Like you don't have that belly or anything." So I guess I'm in good
yeah,
shape.
that's funny. Because I'm 5'8". I'm not tall for a guy either, and yeah, I took the martial arts. That was my big thing. But my legs are, my family, we have this genetic structure. Our legs are like already built. I have big calves, big thighs. You know, if I was a bicyclist, they'd just be like, you know. So I can go in and do like 550 with my legs as a workout. It's like
Hmm.
not a big deal. So I understand that. I guess my second question is, do you have a favorite memory or a favorite guest that you've had on your podcast?
Favorite memory. I don't. Do I have a favorite memory? Favorite guest. Like my favorite writer is Brad Thor.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to interview Brad and kind of learn how he
Wow.
thinks and how he writes, and
Yeah.
that was really really cool. Um, Favorite childhood memory. My dad took me to a Yankee game in 1998, and Mariano Rivera handed me a baseball. That was kind of cool.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
So you were at the old stadium. I love the old
old stadium.
stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah, the new stadium. I mean, it's beautiful and all, and there's not a bad seat in the house, but I really enjoyed the old stadium, both Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium. I really enjoyed that. There was nothing like it. Got plenty of sunburns sitting in the cheap seats.
Well, I got a chance this year. I actually took my dad this year to like the legend seats at Yankee Stadium. So those are the ones where you sit behind home plate and they feed you and everything.
Yeah.
And my dad, he just turned 70. And like for him, this was like the single greatest sports event of his life. So it was kind of cool to be able to like give him that at New Yankee Stadium.
He's sitting there, with his
He had
friends
three
bragging.
bowls of ice cream, Brad. I kid you not.
Living the dream, baby. Living the dream. Hey, Dad, slow down. Does this go with beer, son? Beer and yeah.
He
Uh,
doesn't drink. He doesn't drink. He quit a number of
okay.
years ago.
Oh, good. I'm just cracking up because our dads, are a big part of, I think, what motivates us. Would you say that's true for you? He was an
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah, like my dad, he went pro in baseball, but he had some elbow problems and back problems and stuff like that, so he never made it, to the majors. But if you're 5'9" and throwing over 100 miles an hour, your body can't do that very long. You don't have the leverage a tall guy has. So he ended up actually, because he didn't go to college, he ended up starting in the machine shop at a company, and kept taking every advancement course they had, every seminar they delivered. By the time he retired, he was the VP running the entire. They didn't have a chief operating officer, but he pretty much held that post at the company he was at by the time he retired.
It's impressive, my friend. What our dads did back in the day.
Yeah.
My third and final question I want to ask you is, what is your greatest hope in this day and age?
I want a world without war, a world without insanity, and something and a place where good men, can have the ability to do something about it. I think that's what I want. A world without war and a world without insanity. I know it's a big hope, man, but I think we can do it. I do think we can do it. It's a long-term thing.
A great way to end the show, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, reach out to Jeremy Slate. Just look him up online, Jeremy Slate or Jeremy Ryan Slate, one or the other, and look up Command Your Brand. And the new book, the website for the new book, Jeremy?
Is bestpodcastbook.com. The book is called Command Your Brand, Grow Your Impact, Income, and Influence in a New Media Landscape. That is bestpodcastbook.com.
Woohoo. Awesome. Take advantage of that, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, Jeremy, thank you for an extraordinary conversation, brother, here on Awakened Nation.
Absolutely, Brad. I've really been looking forward to this, man. I know my team's got me really hyped about this one, so I'm glad we got a chance to chat today.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, tune in next week. We always have a great guest here on Awakened Nation. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success will be because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.